So there's me. Privacy has become quite an interesting, honestly, an obstacle when it comes to measurement and how we're able to use data in the same way that we had before. And as I tried to think about what I could compare it to, there was one article that kind of stuck in my head over the last year. Did anyone read this? Just Kevin, who we talked about together. So the article is by Allison P. Davis, who I don't know a newer term for this, but she's hip, and that's a big part of her, how she views herself, her personality. And she's emerging from isolation, suddenly very anxious about the idea that she no longer knows what we're all going to wear together, what makes someone hip, what we're talking about, what's funny, what we're all watching. And is sent an article from a friend called Vibe Shift by Sean Monahan. So Sean Monahan was part of an art collective in Boston earlier in the decade, and their whole shtick, as Tom Peters would say, is that they were able to articulate where we were in the culture at the moment and identify where they were going to go next. And the article basically lays out the thesis that in our lives we only have so many vibe shifts that we can seamlessly fit in before the time has passed, right? And we're just going to settle into where we were most comfortable. The author of this kind of views this as death, right, and is very scared about it. But the article got quite a bit of traction, and Sean Monahan was like, great, I'm going to monetize this, charge people for a much more expensive Substack, and the point of it was that he was going to tell you what was coming next. And then he got money, and he had nothing. He had no idea what was coming next anymore. And that is what stuck with me from this article. I'm someone that has always felt comfortable, well, to be like, not in anything that this author was talking about. I'm cool, just for the record. Like, I'm cool. When this goes up on YouTube, like, I'm a good person. But when it comes to marketing and business, I work for Call of Peakna, right? I should know what's going on in the moment, what we're doing, where things are going, where you should put your bets, where we think the bets should go. But the last couple years, it was a very different feeling because we were no longer talking about things being added to our capabilities. We were suddenly dealing with things that were just working, no longer working anymore. And so today, and the reason for that is for privacy. So today we're going to kind of walk through briefly, because it's been touched on a lot, how we got here with data and privacy and the reaction to it, and trying to find a way forward that can overcome this sudden lapse in the bridge. So one of the reasons why this is such whiplash is for marketing, the last decade was incredibly fast moving, right? We've touched on this a lot, so I'm going to try and be succinct. Everyone gets online. Everyone's going to the same places online. We're all using the same identifier. And then all that data was stored in a place that could now be easily shared. And that led to an incredible infrastructure that allowed us to target user-level data much more effectively than we ever had before, right? Before, we're talking about aggregates of data, demographic data, and now we're able to see user-level path data as all of these different participants in this web can identify, record, hash, pass on, re-identify, using email as the identifier largely, and third-party cookies. Some companies that I think really just are great examples of the power that was suddenly available. Allbirds, Warby Parker, direct-to-consumer companies that now had much more might than before, were able to get much more funding, and showcase what was now available and how quickly they could rise. So they didn't need a location, right? All of this was done on the internet, but we're not talking about a marketplace the way internet had sometimes been able to function. They had a direct product that they were able to sell. They had basically no brand awareness, but were able to find incredible traction on the exact target demographic they were going after. And obviously they built a website and had one, but they could put a lot of focus on just using the e-commerce platforms that existed, Amazon and others. And so they didn't need to build from scratch so much infrastructure that was needed to be built before, and could just suddenly ramp up very quickly, as Kevin alluded to, and as we'll see a little bit later. So this was the potential, and then there were the pitfalls. I think that's the contrast. So the first framing of this was largely around cyber attacks, at least cyber attacks in my recollection. The Equifax data breach, WannaCry, all of these things suddenly made it very scary because we're like, wait, what were you collecting? And like, why do they have it, right? And suddenly it was used maliciously against us. Christopher Penn kind of outlaid all these, but I think what I want you to focus on is the pattern, which has made things, again, very hard to focus on the end game here. It moves from public regulation. GDPR just celebrated its 5th year anniversary, right? 2018 is when it went into effect. And when it went into effect, it was very robust in its outlook, but very light on details. And so, again, what's made it hard is it's, being from the US, it's more like a constitutional amendment. It is getting redefined and litigated constantly, and more defined, and we have to react to that. And that led into private regulations by major market participants, right? Chrome is 60% of the browser market. When they decided to end third-party cookies whenever they do, that's the game. That is basically browsers. Firefox, Safari already ended it. Apple, a bigger deal. When they added the honestly, they needed a better name for this. It's impossible to say. Ask app not to track or whatever it is, reduced an incredible amount of data that was available to us to track that user-level data. So we already seen this pivots from, all right, a focus on cybersecurity, keeping your data safe, keeping your identity safe, and redefining what identity was from explicit details like name and email to enough detail that someone could form your identity with the data that's there. So what are some areas where we're looking at where additional restrictions could happen? One of those is health data. So this came out in 2018, but I think it's thought-provoking. It was largely focused and worried about the new wearable data that would happen, right? They're able to check pulse. They were worried that marketers, if they knew that data, could manipulate it to get you to buy something you didn't want to buy. But it takes an extra step in that all of your online data is health data, because if you're going to WebMD, if you're searching for something, that could be stitched together to find your state of mind. Your mileage may vary on that interpretation, but this continues to be the framing that gains more and more prominence when we're talking about privacy, is where it once was, again, cybersecurity to identity. Health is now how we're often talking about it, and one of the reasons we have to keep talking about it, and again, this is a very US-focused speech, so I'm sorry if you have some different markets here, but the US does not have a federal data policy for real, or federal privacy bill. But that might change, and one of the reasons why I put a higher percentage on it now than I would have prior is because of TikTok and the recent hearings that happened. So the big crux of this, right, now there's a foreign company that is very popular with US citizens. They're on it all the time, and that data could get sucked up and moved into the CCP surveillance state. This is the exact same argument that EU has with US data. EU has with how US companies can use EU citizen data, right? Their citizens using Google Analytics, going to any website, getting sucked into Google Analytics, which can be pulled in to the US surveillance state. And it's getting some bipartisan support because, which is interesting because there's no real hard constituency for this, but there's obviously a lot that might fight against it. But if it does find a way forward, you're going to have to worry about additional regulations which might wrap in the health side of it and be a much more, a bigger evolution from the EU standard than we may have expected. So why has this mattered to marketing, right? A lot of these things, again, I'm not saying are bad, but they certainly have repercussions. A lot of the changes to Apple had some immediate effects on specifically Facebook advertising. Their costs went up way higher and were a lot more volatile in the pricing that you had. The other thing with this is and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but that whole idea of now focusing on user-level data and how they're interacting with your communication points across the internet is incredibly fractured now. We're not able to see that single pathway that were before, so it's kind of thrown out a lot of the models which gained prominence and were very recently called the gold standard for media modeling. And even if, this is talking about a lot of advertising data, but the other big issue here is the opt-in consent. So that move where you're suddenly, again, Christopher Penn was talking about this, you're getting people to say yes. Well, that's 20%. So if you only collect anonymous data, 20 to 30%, you're suddenly working with a fraction of your full data set, and you can't even be sure that it's a representative sample. Because I always click yes because I know the marketers, they're trying their best, but like no one else does. I'm the full 20%. All right, so how do we survive this? At this point, you might guess, I'm going to propose we take the long view. And my entry into this discourse is to use the Lindy effect. Has anyone heard of the Lindy effect? All right, so no one relates to me at all. So again, cultural trend pieces are the only way out of here. This one's a little convoluted, how it became a lifestyle trend, but I like it nonetheless. Nassim Nicholas Taleb, who is extremely online and belligerent and brilliant and mean, and we're going to cut this part out of YouTube because I'm scared that he'll find it, but he came to prominence for his investment strategies, and his idea is that humans don't believe that anything bad will happen in the future, right? Despite Billy Joel's "We Didn't Start the Fire," despite all of our slides, we're like, pandemic happened? Oh, thank God that's over. Nothing bad will ever happen again, right? And so his investment strategies were like, bad things will happen. You need to look for the things that are durable and can even thrive. And he created this Lindy effect, which was basically saying, give more prominence to things that have survived for a longer time, because they're more likely to survive a longer time into the future, which is very convoluted. Here's what I'm talking about. If something is on Broadway for 10 years, it's more likely that that's the one that's going to be on Broadway for another 10 years rather than the one that's only been on there for 1 year, right? It's giving more prominence to the fact that something has already overcome some obstacles and is likely to have some more durability into the future. This turned into a lifestyle trend because they're like, all right, if you can use this for investment, can I use this for what I eat? And he said yes. So the Lindy way of living is like tea, awesome. Coffee has only been around 400 years, so he's skeptical on it. But like Diet Coke, not Lindy yet. So obviously this is foolproof. So why do I want to apply this to marketing? Well, I do think that there is great power in just knowing that something has been able to survive the multiple technology shifts that we've already seen in marketing, which is already young, right? We're talking about something that's, I don't know, I'm going to look at Kevin, 110, give me up or down, 120 years old, lifetime forever. So if something has been able to survive the changes in how we market to people with technology, with different communication channels, it is something that we can feel a little bit more confident in putting some more investment in it now. So we're going to put together, is it a playbook? I don't know, I came up with a title a long time ago, but here's 3 ideas that I think have a lot better chance of surviving this next decade than just focusing on what we were just doing. So the first, reallocating to long-term activities. 2, personalized, not optimized. I'm going to explain all these. And then 3, how we're going to measure this. So the first, this is the second picture of someone smoking. And I just want to be clear, I don't advocate that. I don't know what I'm doing with this stuff. So brand building. When we're talking about marketing, brand building's Lindy. I'm going to go back to something that Kevin said with the Google Analytics joke, and I need to explain it a little bit more, which is always what makes jokes good. It's not Google Analytics that was standing next to the store and saying, hey, you should go in there, and giving themselves all the credit. It was Google Analytics marketing attribution models, which became very popular in deciding where you were going to put your marketing spend. They were much more transparent than what came before, which is what we're going to talk about, but it was the equivalent. If, let's come up with an example, You sell shoes, right? We're going to go with Allbirds. You suddenly stand this up. You have a store now. You have Google Analytics on it. You do paid search. You do paid social. Person comes, clicks on a paid social ad, and then they search for it. They click on your paid ad, and then they convert it. This is me ad-libbing, and I'm sorry. The marketing attribution model can see all of those steps, right? Now we have data that we're getting from those social platforms that they're saying, here's what someone clicked on. We know paid search from Google, and we can see all of that. We're now focused on the user. And it created these models that gave credit to each of those for converting. Now in this case, you were a brand new company. You would give credit to each of those. That is how you got that sale. But if you're a company that's been around for a while and you did the same thing, the model is still giving 100% of the credit to each of those touch points, which isn't right. Because it's saying if you were to stop all of your social and paid search activity, turned it all off, you would have 0 conversions at that point, right? But we know that's not true. There's a lot of offline activity happening. There's locations happening. And that is what we're talking about with this. This marketing attribution became a much bigger deal because it was used in a lot of the purchases and allocation of dollars that we had. But even though it was incredibly transparent, and it still has an excellent ability to pivot on a day-to-day basis because he's getting very strong signals right away, it was ignoring so much very powerful activities and only focusing on the end of the funnel, which is where I'm coming back. This is, again, Grace Kite, which just is something we've talked about with performance marketing. It's incredible to get in front of people that are already in a purchase mindset and put your value proposition to them, but you're ignoring some things that have higher growth potential, and that's what I'm looking for here. A big shift in a lot of the marketing analytics community and the way that they're talking is cost per acquisition was giving too much credit to the digital channels. It was giving all of the credit to the digital channels and informing too much of the decisions that we made, and missing out on all that could happen with, let me take a step back with it. It was giving too much credit there, and it wasn't focused enough on incrementalism, right? When you're saying all of your acquisitions are a result of these channels that we can measure, it was giving too much credit to them, and it would really obscure the cost of some of those, because what you should have been measuring is the incremental growth that you were getting from specifically adding money to that. And by shifting things to brand, one of the things we know is that it can increase the amount of potential buyers that you have, as Kevin kind of alluded to, and can help. One, it just tends to be a higher growth play, and at a time where it's not quite clear which of these channels will perform as good as they can, as good as they had done, it's an area where I would say it's a safer bet, even though it's very difficult to execute, or so I hear. And so where are we going to target brand? And I think this is an interesting trend, right? One of the things that's hard is we can't just go and put a commercial in front of 25 million people in prime time anymore. But there's a lot of things that are opening up that weren't before. There's a lot of subscription services that sort of closed up advertising to it at the end of the decade. And now Netflix has its own ad tier, Amazon has an ad tier, Disney has an ad tier, and people are receptive to getting a lower price point in exchange for being advertised to. And then the next is digital out of home, right? There's a lot of fun campaigns that you can see, but again, you're able to target much more effectively, and there's only going to be more and more coming online. So next, I put so much time into choosing these images, and no one will understand why I even chose these, and that is a personal, that's a personal gift to me. The incentives have changed, right? We talked about Allbirds, and I'm actually using them as an example, but the ability to use third-party platforms because people were already there and just using what they had. Well, you don't have that data anymore. So there's a huge incentive shift to start building owned experiences where you can get that first-party data, because with first-party data, one, you own it. If there's changes to privacy regulations, you control that relationship. You can also take first-party data and bring it to other ad platforms, bring it to digital out-of-home providers, bring it to Amazon ad service, and say, hey, we're looking for people that look just like this, right? You have that data and the power to do it. But the scary part here is that's hard to make first-party experiences that are great, and it only matters if you can get people to authenticate themselves. So there's a huge range of different businesses here. For some of you, there's a very easy to sell value proposition to getting people to make an account and an app with you. But for others, longer business cycles, it's much harder. I think the way out of this will be personalization, but I want to separate myself from some of the things that Christopher Penn was talking about, which is actually what I think we should not be doing. A lot of the value prop around personalization has been it can help you reduce some of the friction as people are on their way to converting or purchasing, right? It is a lift to sales. That is awesome, right? Getting more sales is great, but I think we have to remember that the benefit to getting people to our site is their data. So we have to get them to keep coming back to the site and continue to build that relationship. So what I think needs to happen is a shift in how we deploy personalization to a focus on making the experiences great, as well as optimization where it happens. But this power is, if you continue to get this data, you can deploy and communicate to them in areas which might continue to build more customers, find better relationships, and build more sales over a longer term period of time, rather than just trying to suck all you can from a individual interaction. And so areas where I think we have a way to go. This all came from Twilio. Two areas that I thought were very interesting. One, continued increase to people saying they're frustrated with inconsistent digital experiences. Granted, like Twilio, this is their business, but still interesting numbers. The second half of it is brands say we're doing awesome at this, at personalizing to our customers, and consumers are saying only 15% said yes. Now, why would that happen? A lot of reasons, but one would be if you personalize to optimize the sales path, that might not have been an experience that people recognized and thought was great because they don't know what the other one was. Whereas if you personalize, and I'll give an example from a client that's here, United, right? Went on the flight yesterday, and all of a sudden on my lock screen was the time of flight, which was incredibly exciting to me, and I enjoyed it a lot. And I'm like, I like flying United, right? Not necessarily related to going to purchase another ticket, but it does make me want to use their app and make sure that I'm logged into it, right? Another part of this, with Chris Penn alluded to, so I'm not going to spend too much time, but a lot of preference for making sure you're getting their communication channel right. He focused, I'm sorry, I don't know why I got really frustrated by that. He focused on behavioral data, which may or may not be enough. Make sure you're using user surveys and reaching out to your customers and actually giving them a place to tell you how to communicate to them. But I think there's a lot of great examples of this now. Restaurants are doing a great job texting you now when your reservation's ready. Why is texting better? It's timely, you don't want to miss it, gives you a big ring. Email would be more passive, but if you're going to text them, hey, we have 15% off shrimp appetizers, it's better to go to my inbox. Sorry, I thought way too hard about what the discount was going to be on, and it didn't matter. So one of the difficult things about the number of different companies that's here is there's a really hard value proposition to get customers or potential customers to log in for certain company digital touch points. So one area where I thought, hey, this is all playing into their hands was for B2B companies that deployed an inbound strategy. Inbound, right, you made additional content, you gave them reasons to come and get thought leadership. In exchange, you'd promote things like subscriptions to email. But with the change to opt-in, it's really made it difficult to still measure how effective things were to just put out content, right? You don't know how many people are actually reading it. And you'll have to find, which has always been the case, but you're going to have to continue to find experiences where people are going to engage and give their information to you. There's two examples that I thought are relevant just because it's a similar case, right? Which are both media examples. One is Semaphore, which just is a recent startup, and I thought was particularly interesting just because this is post all the VC money going into digital news startups. And so how they were going to be sustainable, 30% of their revenue is coming from events. Events are not new at all to people that might be doing B2B and inbound strategy, but I think it's an interesting validation for it just coming off of the pandemic. And that people still do value just getting that information in a more personal touch, but they might not want to give it just for a single white paper, right? An event allows them to network and has additional possibilities. And next is the New York Times buying Wordle, buying The Athletic. What are they doing? Well, they're creating a bundle, which is what newspapers did for 100 years before really offloading a lot of it and classifieds being turned and eaten into Craigslist, right? Just goes to show as they look to create more value for their subscriber base, they're reaching outside of their excellence, which is hard news and crossword puzzles, so I guess that's not that far off. But trying to find other areas where you can excite and engage with potential customers and use the power of the resources in your company and your brand to get people to authenticate, because you need to have them authenticate to have it matter, and using that data elsewhere. And then lastly, how are we going to measure this in a way that was as effective as marketing attribution in the last decade? This goes to trusting things that have been around more. I love this example where someone pointed out that like the last 6 people that have been on Forbes 30 under 30 that were that ran finance companies are all in jail. And so it goes back to knowing the rules before you break them, and making sure that, especially when you're measuring, you are thinking about how it can have its faults. And this came a couple years ago. This was a great HBR article that I don't know if it coined it, but it focused on the idea of surrogation, which is mentally replacing your strategy with metrics. And it had an awesome example, which was the Wells Fargo employees were opening up accounts on behalf of customers without their knowledge. And the reason that they were doing that was not because Wells Fargo was like, we want our customers to have more accounts, but they wanted their customers to engage more with them. And one of the metrics that they introduced was customers that tended to have accounts across more of their services were more engaged with them. So how did people respond? Well, after a point in time, they're like, well, all right, let's just start opening accounts across these different services, and we're succeeding, right? This is what can happen when you stop thinking about what are we actually trying to accomplish, and then how are we going to measure it, and just start thinking about, all right, this metric's established, we should just focus on moving it. This was an interesting example of that. Upfronts happened recently, right? Upfronts, advertisers go to TV and they say, here's our content, and they say, we'll bid on it. There was a push to start using some additional metrics, and especially a push to start using some more performance-related metrics that was related to, we show you this advertisement on TV, you immediately went to an app to download it or went to our website. And the pushback was, let's keep using Nielsen. Nielsen's viewer panels have been flawed and are known to be flawed for a long time. But ultimately, they've worked for a long period of time. And despite being flawed, we know what they're trying to measure pretty clearly, what people are watching. And despite the fact that they have a lot more ability to be more precise on a user level, they have monitoring on the box tops to say what channels are actually on. It's not necessarily the same as what people are watching. So what do I propose? There's been a big movement here, again with incrementality, to move back to marketing mix modeling. So I'm introducing marketing efficiency ratio here. Pretty simple. One of the reasons why we'd be moving to this, the data that you need is data that you have. And so we're not concerned about additional changes to regulation affecting what data you'll use on your decisions to place your communication money. This is just money that you put into your different channels. What is the revenue that you get back? And so here's where things are an improvement here. One, in the marketing mix modeling, you put every channel that you're using, including brand spend, including offline spend, all of it is included, and you're looking at the incremental gains, just the growth effect that it's having. And there's been some awesome thought leadership recently in HBR, another Harvard Business Review article, and efforts on behalf of Meta's marketing science team and someone named Igor Skolkin, who has showed that if you just do some additional experiments to, oh my God, I forget this word all the time. You know when you have a scale and you put on your bowl and then you hit the button, what is that called? Okay, that's not the word I was looking for. Zero. So anyway, Calibrate. Thank you so much. Right, the marketing mix model is forwarding looking. So it's saying if you put this amount of money across these different channels, you can expect this uplift. That is a prediction. This is just saying if you do some experiments to vet whether these predictions are happening across these different channels, you can make a much stronger marketing mix model whose issue was that if you gave the same data previously and why we moved to something that was more transparent to like 4 different analysts, you would have gotten 4 different models. But with this calibration, you can actually create something that has consistency and can be vetted against and communicated to stakeholders with more vigor and find your way to a much more confident marketing mix. So final takeaways here. I actually took up more time, but I have the microphone. So no one can leave. There's been responses and changes that happen to privacy, and I'm looking for ways that we can respond by looking at things that have more durability. So where cost increases, which we've seen in a lot of performance marketing channels, long-term budgeting activity like brand building is a nice way to look for higher growth plays at a time where we're not sure we're going to get as much money back as we had for our previous spend. Oh man, sorry. No, we're not done. Now that the incentive has shifted to owned experiences, invest in personalization strategies that are going to improve those experiences, because it's not that sales lift is bad. It's that we're trying to keep them coming back and get their first-party data. I know that sounds creepy. But in the last part, as there's a shift away from these marketing attribution models, consider building out a marketing mix model. There's, again, that Meta team is awesome. They created Robin, which is a R-based machine learning model which can help you build out your own marketing mix model and find a much more confidence path forward.